Thank you for the moment of silence for the 137 hostages who are still being held to this day. We had a hearing a couple weeks ago on anti-Semitism where I shared with my colleagues and the witnesses that a dual U.S. Israeli citizen with family in Waterford, Connecticut, was one of those being held at the time, and we thought her husband, her name was Liat Bening and Aviv Bening. The good news is a week ago, Liat was released. And unfortunately, a day later, the Israeli military shared with the family that human remains, which were found at the kibbutz where the violent attack took place, unfortunately matched up to Aviv. Again, Hamas never shared the information about whether or not they had him or not, which is just another example of their treachery. Dr. Nadell, in your testimony on page 8, you talked about President Biden's U.S. national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, and in particular, you talked about the use of Title VI of the U.S. Civil Rights Act in terms of being an effective tool on campuses to combat anti-Semitism. I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
So Title VI allows for responding to some of the issues that the presidents of these universities, but also, frankly, of most universities around the nation, it seems at the moment, have been dealing with in terms of when anti-Semitism moves beyond free speech, beyond rhetoric, and it involves harassment or intimidation. The issue is that the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Education needs to be fully funded in order to implement the U.S. strategy to counter anti-Semitism. And I just want to comment about this strategy because it is an extraordinary document. It has actions for the White House to carry out, or that division, but it has issues for Congress to carry out, which I have a sense Congress has not been carrying out, and it also has major charges to whole of society to respond to anti-Semitism, some of which we are hearing is already happening on the campuses. The problem is they don't make headlines because they're not a bunch of protesters.
Thank you. And again, it's important to note that document was released back in May of 2023, certainly before this committee and the outrageous events of October 7th. And the ranking member mentioned in his opening remarks that, at the same time we're holding this hearing, we're also now still trying to get a budget passed for fiscal year 2024. The majority in the House reported out their budget, which, as he mentioned, carried a cut for the Office of Civil Rights. To be more specific, it's a 25% cut, $35 million out of their rather small budget, $72 million lower than what the president had asked for. We had a witness here again 2 weeks ago from who worked for almost 20 plus years at ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. They've been around for 110 years fighting anti-Semitism in this country. And again, she talked about the fact that, that type of cut is just going to cripple the ability of the anti-Semitism police, if you want to sort of look at it that way, in terms of trying to stop this type of activity on campuses. And again, I was just wondering if you had sort of what your view is of a cut in terms of the impact of the Office of Civil Rights to do its job.
I think the cut is absolutely devastating. And what I would also remind everyone is that the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Education does not only focus on anti-Semitism. It focuses on all forms of hate. And I would guess, I actually tried to find this information but was unable to do so, but I would guess that the majority of complaints are not coming from Jewish students, although maybe now, given what happened since October 7th, I would guess the majority of the complaints are actually coming from people of color and from others who have faced terrible bias. So it is unthinkable, unconscionable to make that cut.
Now, and talk is cheap. I mean, I've been around here a while. Budgets are what really, I think, show the true willingness to act in situations like this. And I'd just like to close by mentioning that in Connecticut, a young transfer student, international student from the West Bank, Tahsin Ali Hamad, a sophomore at Trinity College. He was a math major who was up visiting friends in Burlington, Vermont. They were walking from going bowling, and this coward came out of his house with a firearm and at point-blank range shot all three students who were they were going to a relative's house at the time. And it shows, again, that the civil rights effort of the Department of Justice, which also was being subjected to a potential cut, needs to get full funding. in the Office of Civil Rights. And with that, I would yield.